way that we're not only engaging on a local, but also global level. And to her right, we have Aishu, who's an alumni advisor of UNDGC's Youth Steering Committee, a dear friend, and I think very much an anchoring force that has been kind of along this journey with us for so many years as we as youth have been championing and advocating at the United Nations. And so together, I think we're really here to explore not only like how youth are leading, but like why it's important as young people that we not only get involved at this local level, but really engage at the global. We know some of these best ideas on how we transform our societies come from those who are at the front lines of change. Right? Who's most sensitive to the shifts in society? It's not those who are enfranchised and established. It's those really trying to make their way into and understand the society. So at its heart, I think youth really have the pulse of our societies and the voice of where we're heading. And so if we really want to create a equitable and just world for all, and one that is inclusive and rooted in good values, I think we really need to listen to the youth. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Zoya to kind of kick us off and listen to the youth, right? Why is it so important for us to bring youth into spaces like the United Nations? Why does that matter to you?
Thank you. Technical issues. Thank you so much, Steve, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you so much, Ali and Aishu, for having me on this panel. It's a wonderful event. Super excited to be here. So, for your question, Steve, why is it important to have youth in, diplomacy at the United Nations? Well, my go-to answer to that is, we're the future. Young people are the ones who are going to be inheriting our world in 20 or 30 years, while all the old people at the UN are going to be long gone. We're going to be the ones who are going to be running the world. And I think it's really important that we don't kind of have this abrupt we need to educate kids about leadership and advocacy, because not all young people understand them and want to be part of something like this. So I think it's really important to kind of understand that young people deserve a seat at the table because they bring fresh ideas and new perspectives, and young people know what they want to see in the future. So I think it's very important to have that.
Beautiful. I think it's quite lovely. Thanks, Zoya. I think it's quite interesting as we think about youth not understanding the impact they could have, right? And I think oftentimes when we speak about the United Nations, we speak about the importance of transparency and its interplay with the opaqueness of decision making, right? And so as you're speaking to how this transition from generation to generation should not be abrupt, it's only by empowering youth leaders to really engage with the UN that we can really help make that transition smoother. Right? And in doing so, we can really ensure that the consequences of the actions that we're taking in the present moment aren't weighing so heavy on future generations in a way that is detrimental to their flourishing. And I really appreciated those insights. So I'll pass it over to Ali to continue us on in reflecting on actually pass it to Aishu. I messed up my stack. But for Aishu, I think from your perspective, why is it so important for youth voices to be present in the UN? You've been advocating at the UN since I've known you, almost 10 years ago, and bringing that fresh youth perspective into these ecosystems. Why is it so important for you?
Thank you very much, Steve, for also the kind introduction. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow global citizens. And of course, to everyone joining us online. As Steve mentioned, my name is Aishu Deva, and I serve as an alumnus and advisor of the United Nations Department of Global Communications, also known as DGC Youth Representative Steering Committee, which we do have an acronym, also referred to as Steering Committee for short. To answer Steve's question, youth are catalysts for development through the determination, passion, and vision for a better world. And I also indeed refer to Zoya's comments as youth are, of course, going to be in a lot of the positions that many adults are in now, for those being the torchbearers of the future. So keeping that in mind, their perspectives and policy making definitely serve as a tool for inclusivity. as many of you are aware, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is part of the United Nations 2030 Development Agenda, the cornerstone belief is leave no one behind. Hence, having youth in some of these platforms, in which Ali also has been very pivotal, whom will of course have support afterwards, where we can really demonstrate that every person is a part of creating a better world. And as you know, the term in the United Nations, united. So we all are indeed one big global family to ensure that we have peace. So I pass it back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Aishu. I think this framework of global citizenship, right, is one that believes that our work at the local isn't independent or disconnected from those around us, but that we see the suffering of those far away from us in distance as close to us in heart. And I think like the UN being this platform that is actively working to create these systems that address these challenges is one of those reasons why we as youth need to be there. Right. And I also really appreciate that you spoke to this framework of leave no one behind, right? Because in its abstract conception, I think it's really easy to appreciate, but to implement is tremendously difficult, right? Because how do you ensure that the voices of the most marginalized, those with the least education or access to these spaces, even have the opportunity? Right. And so I know one thing that you humbly didn't speak to, but we've been doing a lot of work around has really been trying to fight and carve out these spaces where policymakers may not necessarily listen to youth, but because of our presence, because of our advocacy, are encountering youth voices and youth perspectives, recognizing that we're not just the torchbearers of the future, but that we're actively already working right now on the ground. So I'll pass it over to Ali to kind of continue this conversation. And I think layering on top of this, recognizing that like it's important for you to be engaged with the UN, and I'd love for you to explore why that is for you, but then also like it's also important for you to be empowered, like to be educated. And I think the work that you're doing is a testament to that belief. So I'd love for you to share with us some of that, like reasons of why it's so important for you to be engaged.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to my fellow panelists. We are having this important conversation on the role of youth in public diplomacy and specifically at the United Nations. And you asked me why it is important for you to get engaged with the UN. I think when a lot of people see at the United Nations, they see it as a hope that the word united is there and the nations is there. And the moment when United Nations was formed, it was formed after World War II to sustain the peace and avoid future wars. So it's a failure. That's it.
That's a blank compliment.
Yeah. So people wanting to avoid the wars and wanting to sustain peace. We have to understand, before I can answer your question, we have to understand why United Nations was formed. United Nations was formed because we wanted to have peace. We wanted to have long peace. We wanted to avoid world wars. We had a failure of the League of Nations, and the failure of League of Nations pushed the world into World War I and World War II. And there have such organizations like UN existed before the UN, and they all failed. For now, UN have been sustaining a lot, and I think one of the things why it's sustaining is because it has been very open. And now it's transforming to be very open organization. Previously, UN used to have a very executive sort of structure. The formal way of engaging with the UN is through the member states. You are a member state, you are part of the UN, and you're the member of the United Nations, and that is the only way. But then comes the role of civil society organizations, civil society itself. The major group on the sustainable development came in, and these are all the mechanisms that bring the people from outside of the existing formal structure, that is the member state based or member state led. Member state means, if you're not aware of the term, the countries or the member countries who are the members of the United Nations. So that was the only way. Now the civil society is coming into the play, as we can see that having larger and larger and larger role of the society into the United Nations, and a lot of things that are happening at the UN right now. For example, Summit of the Future concluded last year, and there was a heavy presence of the civil society organization, specifically youth. I haven't seen anything like that, like the interest of young people, the involvement of young people at the institutional level by from the support of the institution of the UN for the young people to get involved in making the document that we call the Pact for the Future. Um, so now coming to the question like why it is really important, because I think if you look at the demographics of young people around the world, it's like more than 59% of the population right now is under the age of 34, 35. But if I go back, if I look at the actual analysis of the United Nations population department that does the census, the population of young people that is under the age of 24 is around 1.9 billion, and which is a lot. So I think first of all the population demography is more than 59% when we talk about these are young people. And then we talk about another population, 52% of the world population right now is on the women. It's not just about the youth, but also the inclusion of the women into the system and the involvement that they're doing. Young people comes with the fresh ideas. You all youth who are attending, they come with the fresh ideas. And you have your own idea of how the future looks like. You are more tech savvy, you know more about the modern technology, you more know about the trends, you know more about how your peer, how your colleagues communicate, what they think about different things. And I think it's about time if United Nations want to transform, we want to have peace, we need to have those young people, those young voices come in, not just at the level of the civil society, because I think we we felt ourselves as the lowest level of the UN engagement. When it comes to the civil society and youth. And I think from the member state level, we have a lot of diplomats coming in and going in our conversation today and yesterday, and will come tomorrow as well. And our conversation is going to be the same, that let's have youth involvement. We are doing it at the civil society level, but let's also have it at the member state level. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. I think I really appreciated how you painted the UN as a space of hope, right? Like it's the last recourse. If there's exploitation at a country level, where do you find justice? Where do you find your voice? You find it in these global spaces where people come together. And so similarly, I think you lifted up how it's a member state driven process, but we're really looking to like ensure deeper representation. Right, and your vision of like what youth engagement looks like meaning moving forward is that like if we want to sustain peace, we need deeper and more meaningful participation. And so I think similarly from my side, one thing that I see is the importance of engaging youth is that there's so many of these policies that are being shaped that are impacting the very young people who are suffering from either neglect or misuse of these policies. Right, and so how do we ensure that this transformation process is one that like not only honors the voices of youth, but that they're directly engaged in the shaping of that policy, right? And so I know we've shared a little bit in previous panels. I'm excited to kind of dive into that continuing on. So I'll pass it over to Aishu to kind of move us forward. Ali spoke a little bit about meaningful youth engagement. Right, like, and I know yesterday Zoya spoke about tokenistic youth engagement and how it's a dangerous like facade that people will be like, oh, you're a cool youth, come here and like that's it. Right? But I would love for you to share with us in your years of experience as a young person engaging with the UN, how has your voice and presence been meaningfully utilized to create change?
Thank you very much, Steve. In terms of youth engagement, coming from a personal experience, as we have mentioned about the DGC Youth Representative Steering Committee, also known as the Steering Committee for short, that actually was formed in 2016 after the United Nations DGC, previously known as Department of Public Information, Civil Society Conference in Gyeongju, South Korea. And this actually marked a very important milestone in the way the program developed. Now, just to go back for context, the Youth Representatives Program at DGC commenced in 2009 after the Civil Society Conference in Mexico City, Mexico, which provides the opportunity for youth between the ages of 18 and 32 or in NGOs associated with DGCs to be engaged with issues related to the United Nations agenda. And if we drop on the statistics, there are more than 550 youth representatives in more than 500 organizations in 100 countries around the world. And the program serves as a platform for youth to collaborate with their respective NGOs in intergenerational dialogue and advocacy-related endeavors. So now, since we had that platform, going back to the steering committee, which formed in 2016, I actually had the pleasure, along with my esteemed panelists and colleagues, Steve, Ali, and also Shirabe Mercado, who is part of the staff here, to be a part of this committee, which really actively sought to have youth as co-creators in some of the program planning at the department. For instance, some of us and other also fellow youth representatives around the world were part of the youth subcommittee for the Civil Society Congress in 2016, 2018, and 2019, which were all, of course, as I mentioned, in South Korea and in the various parts of the United States, where we had created a youth hub where there were dialogues such as the one that is being hosted right now as we speak, and other also panels. And also we had performances where we actually suggested some of these ideas working alongside with DGC colleagues who are, of course, UN staff members. So this was one way of having that active participation, being as co-creators, collaborators. We even had, beginning from the 2018 edition of the Civil Society Conference, where youth were not just in a subcommittee, but they were also serving as co-chairs in other subcommittees, which include the communications subcommittee of the conference, exhibits, etc. So we really saw how the department had this foresighted vision in ensuring that youth are, of course, not just beneficiaries, but really part of the process. And so I'll pass it back to you, Steve, to hear from our other colleagues.
Awesome. Thanks, Aishu. I think you really lifted up how, through your engagement, we were able to create systemic transformation within this UN department, right? By showing them the value of youth engagement, they not only lifted and elevated our presence in their programmatic development, but also ensured that the dialogues that we were hosting translated into actions, that translated into commitments from both the department and some of the outcomes of these conferences. And so I think we saw that through UNDGC's understanding of the value of youth, it benefited the trajectory of how deep and connected they were to civil society. So that's a really lovely sharing. I'll pass it over to Zoya to continue this conversation in thinking about what meaningful engagement looks like. And I'd love for you to share with us your vision of what that is. You just founded your nonprofit, and we're really shaping up to come into really exciting things. And I'd love for you to kind of, as a youth, share this vision to us.
Thank you so much, Steve. So, my vision for meaningful youth engagement is, number one, obviously, to have as many young people in the UN and decision-making spaces. But, it's one thing to have all these young people just be part of these events. I think, as I said yesterday in my speech, just being in the room doesn't mean you're being heard, right? So we can have as many young people at the UN, we can have thousands of people, but what is that going to make? That's not going to do anything, right? We don't want random young people to be part of these spaces. Not everyone is meant to change the world. So, what we're doing with the United Youth Council is, I feel like when we talk about young people should be in decision-making spaces, people immediately think, well, how can we have all young people part of the UN? Well, it's a mistake, because not all people are going to be obviously part of this, but those young people who want to create change, who have that passion, who have the drive to create meaningful, positive change. So, per your question, meaningful change means having the young people who have that passion and that drive to create change in these spaces. The young people who don't know that they want to be part of something bigger, but know that they want to make something for the world. So I think that's very important.
Thanks, Zoya. I think you lifted up quite an interesting angle of diversity of tactics, right? The stage is only so big, the table is only so large. You can maybe only pull up 2 chairs, right, to the seat, and those would be your two youth. But just because that like there's only two chairs doesn't mean there isn't a wave, a community, a collective behind these two youth that are representing the interests of the larger body, right? And so thinking about like where do we as individual youth show up in supporting this larger movement? Where do we belong and how do we contribute? I think is a powerful underlying current to what you were sharing. And then thinking also about like not just showing up to show up, right? But to be able to be heard. And so often I think youth find that like having that bravery, the courage to engage with those in this space to be quite overwhelming, right? And so to be able to provide that like space to empower, educate, and give those opportunities for people to have that sort of like opportunity to be heard, I think is a powerful addition as well.
Yeah, also, Steve, I'd like to add a comment to what Ali said about the Summit of the Future and that young people should be able to be part of it. So, for the Summit of the Future, during ANGA, I was declined registration to attend because I'm under 18. And that's actually, that moment was what sparked me to start talking about, meaningful youth engagement is because I lived it. It's through my experience. I've been declined many times to attend high-level events because of my age, which is just a number, right? So I think that's also a big part of my advocacy.
Awesome, thanks, Leah. Yeah, I think accessibility really is an ongoing challenge that we're working to shape. And so I'll pass it on to Ali to kind of continue us on in thinking about like share with us both IOI and IYC and the role that it's playing in creating this meaningful youth empowerment and leadership development, creating that access and also that next step.
Thank you. I'm going to continue what Zoya mentioned about the Summit of the Future, and there's a small story behind it. That when the Summit of the Future was actually started, the work started from, I think, 2021 when the Secretary General mentioned about this, our common agenda. There was SDG Summit and then there was the Summit of the Future. And right after, day after this SDG Summit, we were on to the Summit of the Future. And me, my team, and a lot of our colleagues, we strongly believe that at the Summit of the Future, we need to have an open registration system. We need to have young people involved who do not have accreditation to attend those conferences and events, because we're talking about Summit of the Future. Like, dude, future is not there. They are like under the age of 18 and they need to be part of it. Summit of the Future, the word future, being designed by an 81-year-old guy. That doesn't make sense to me because he may not be around after 25 years or so. But like we fought so hard to have the accreditation system removed or have a system where the people who do not have accreditation. Accreditation means you have to be with an accredited organization with either ECOSOC or UN Department of Global Communication. And if you're there, then there is a limited quota of how many people, 3 or 4 people can come into the UN meetings or conferences through that accreditation system. But having an open accreditation system or non-accredited system gives access to a lot of these people. We went too far into that fight. I mean, we went as far as we can, and we really advocated for young people to come inside the summit without accreditation. Though I was able to successfully get 22 young people in what I can do inside that summit. But in the end, it was declined. I mean, it was said that like, no, we have this issue, that issue, not just that. Like, a lot of UN itself, member state have the youth delegate program. Even those youth delegates were not able to attend. And then we came up with the solution. We did informal youth summit of the future that we call IYC 10, and we kept it open. We did it right across the street from the UN, and all the young people were there attending the informal youth summit of the future. We call it Youth Summit of the Future, not informal Summit of the Future. It was the Youth Summit of the Future. It went really well, successful. A lot of police were afraid and like, no, this is very controversial. We should not do it. We did it, and it went well. Anyway, sorry about that. That went wrong.
Also, may I add something? I think, as you said, you were fighting a lot, with the UN to have young people part of it. So I actually, also fought a battle with the UN Youth Office. For to be able to potentially get some young people, including myself, to the Summit of the Future. And what was quite strange is, we were fighting the battle with UN Youth Office, who was also saying, it's over 18. I'm very confused. it's a youth office, and you're not letting young people be part of it. Quite controversial, but yeah, thank you. Just wanted to add that.
So I think answering your quick question about international organization of youth and IYC. So I was the runner for the position of the Youth Office Assistant Secretary General. I ended second. And I think because the decision came into the regional play, like which region in the end. So when I was running for the Assistant Secretary General for the UN position, and my whole positioning around the idea behind the youth office was an independent youth agency of the UN, an organization, not a diplomatic department, not a department. There's a difference between a department and an international organization. International organization is like IOM, UNICEF, UN Habitat, where they have their own leaders and head of the organization, and they are part of the UN system, but they are very autonomous when it comes to decision making and operating. It's an international organization of the UN, but it didn't happen. They made it a department, whatever was the reason, and that went from the next day. I implied all the ideas into IOI because not going to waste, and that's the International Organization of Youth will do what we are not able to do with the with the UN Youth Office, and then we are trying to create an international organization with actually having the status with the UN General Assembly as an observer youth organization. There is a couple of organizations, but our idea is way big, where we are trying to engage in people regardless of the regional limitations, regardless of any other limitations. And the idea behind the International Organization of Youth is to have an status with the UN General Assembly and create an organization that is being led by youth and for the youth, not just for the youth, for the entire world, because we're seeing young people's priority are different versus the priority that are on the leadership stages. And so I think the IOI is trying to build bridge that gap between young people and the leadership generation, because we're really working hard on the new generation. Tomorrow we will be announcing and launching our new council, the Council for Future Generation, and that council actually involves children from the age of 14 to 18 who are going to advise us on the way of our communication, the things that we are going to do, our program, projects, conferences, and everything, the content of the conference, the communication on the social media, and the subjects and topics on what we should do. And this is I think, the direction of our organization will be directed and led by the children like the age of Zoya.
Awesome. Thanks, Ali. I think in your reflection, you spoke about how, despite the barriers you found in engaging in the Summit of the Future process, you're able to fight and still get 20 youth into that process, right? And I think that speaks to how we as youth are navigating this larger multilateral ecosystem, which is we're not accepting status quo for what it is, but we're trying to find unique ways and opportunities to champion for a little more inclusion, a little more progress, right? And in doing so, even if we're not able to transform the system overnight, we're holding space for more allies and youth to come into that picture. And I think it's the role and responsibility of all civil society organizations to kind of move us in that direction, right? Too often we find ourselves in a scarcity mindset, saying, oh, because I'm in this very important space and it's limited, I must make the most out of it just for myself, right? But if we operate from a more abundance-oriented mindset, and we see the power that comes from bringing more voices, diverse voices into that space, I think we really begin to see those seeds of transformation, where we're calling on the UN to do the same thing. We're doing it first and showing them how it's done. Right. And so I think in a similar way for Sajid, when we think about meaningful change with youth engagement, what we have found powerful has been in consulting with the UN and advising the UN. Right. So we sit on multiple bodies that have allowed us to shape, whether it's UNICEF's new climate strategy, collaborating with UNHCR to shape how they're partnering and working with refugees in country offices where our youth refugees are meeting with these UN representatives at the ground level, and then in doing so, shaping how they're understanding their nature of reality, right? And then also coming back to here, where we're at the global level, we're collaborating with different UN agencies like UNAOC and UNFPA to really ensure that youth voices in these conferences are not just elevated in panels, but present in bilaterals, really shaping the understanding of their policymakers and decision makers that are coming in from around the world, right? And I think it's by opening up these spaces to youth voices and then training the youth that vision moves forward. And so I want to take us to now question number 3. So coming back to you, Ali, I'd love for you to share with us a little more. You've spoken a little bit about this launch, right? But like, what is needed for us collectively to do to move forward to create this better system and future for all?
I think we have to use I word, inclusion. It's very important. And any system to be successful, it has to be inclusive and tolerant. For example, within our organization, we did when young people come in, they need to be welcomed, they need to feel comfortable, they need to be encouraged, they need to feel mentored. We need to have this ecosystem applied everywhere, all the time. Though even within my organization, I will tell you that we bring in people all the time, that we feel resistance from our member. I mean, because no one really want to pass the torch. It's the most difficult thing to do, and only people with a strong heart and courage can do that. And without that, no organization, no country, no system cannot be successful if you're not passing the torch, and if you're not passing the talent, if you're not giving them the skills that you have, if you're not mentoring them, if you're not giving them what you already have, you are not developing a successful system. You're not developing a future. You are heading towards disasters. I mean, we have seen that when the system had been run by the similar sort of leaderships for years and years, those systems become chronic. Even a water is down there on the ground being there, it will get infected for a long period of time. So I think to create a future, to create a better system, which has to be inclusive, especially inclusive of young people. And young people, when they come in any system organization, they need to be welcomed, they need to be trained, they need to be equipped and ready to go.
I love that. And I think like thinking about the transition will happen, it's either planned or it's inevitable and it's going to be a disaster, right? Whether that's within our own organizations or within the UN ecosystem. And so thinking about making it more intentional, I'll pass it to Aishu. Drawing from your experiences, what is some of the advice that you could give to youth that want to get more involved in public diplomacy at the UN?
Thank you very much, Steve. And I actually must say, I also do agree with my fellow also panelists in how we can create those spaces. I would say to increase, of course, youth participation in some of those platforms at the United Nations is to also like where youth can be as again co-creators, co-collaborators, similar to the Department of Global Communications and their vision, and also viewing youth as equal partners, equal stakeholders. That's where I think also some of the problem comes from is how the perception of youth, as we've discussed throughout the conference, and even how youth also may perceive, their elders. So I think by addressing some of these stereotypes and misconceptions can be addressed when youth and people with many years of experience through an intergenerational approach come together and are viewed equally in some of these spaces. So as we mentioned, if various UN agencies in their respective, of course, divisions include more youth in various roles. Aliyah also had mentioned about member states having a UN Youth Delegate Program. I'm pleased to mention that actually the state of Qatar will be launching their Youth Delegate Program, which they had announced actually just in March at the United Nations during the side event during the Economic and Social Councils known as the Youth Forum. And seeing these initiatives, that's how we can really get youth at the same level. And if I may just add one more note, I know we mentioned about young persons under the age of 18. I know there's been a discussion, especially within one coordinating mechanism at the United Nations, which is a major group of children and youth. And that I know they've had very active discussions how we can include people under 18 because you are missing a very large group of people. So if there's a way through proper diplomatic channels to include people under 18, that's another way we can indeed be able to visualize some of the dreams and aspirations we have for youth in Asia. Thank you very much.
I love that. Thanks, Aishu. Thinking about plugging into MGCY as a resource, engaging with like UNDGC's youth reps as a resource, and then also like this larger macro conversation of as we step into these spaces to be wary of any relationship that is extractive and lean towards and feed collaborations that are more co-created oriented. So I'll pass it over to Zoya to reflect with us what some of these concrete actions you're taking to manifest your vision. How can other youth really support you in this moment?
Thank you, Steve, for that, and thank you so much, Aishu and Ali, for sharing those remarks. So I think kind of like a call to action. Everyone plays a role in creating a better, more equitable future. Everyone, even if you're in some remote, small island, and in the Caribbean, there's a chance for you to create change. And I think it's very important to have organizations like IOI, like Major Group for Children and Youth, like the United Youth Council that are channels and pathways for young people to be able to access, because all of these young people, they have this drive, they have this motivation, they have this passion inside them, but they just don't have the platform and the channel to be able to be part of these events. So I think it's really important to take concrete steps with these organizations to help young people from all over the world. And also quick shout out to Joy Tsai, who's one of our co-founders at the United Youth Council. We're making it possible for young people to be able to be part of UN and be part of global decision making.
Thanks, Zoya. I don't know if you also want to share a little bit of the excitement we have going on in the lead up to UNGA this year. United Youth Council will be doing?
Yeah, 100%. So in September, during UNGA, which is the United Nations General Assembly, the 80th session this year, we're going to be bringing a delegation of 15 to 20 people, 15 to 20 young people from our youth council to partake in decision making, to be part of these events, to meet with world leaders, to speak, to be part of this space and be able to, understand, how the world works and how we can, from all over the world, we have people from Mexico, Australia, Dubai, India. We have people from all over the world. And I think it's very important to take people, not just from the US, but from really on a more multilateral stage. So it's really exciting what we're planning to do in September.
Awesome, thanks, Zoya. And then on my side, I'll just quickly say, I think a lot of the opportunity comes from after you've been empowered and educated, right? And so if you're looking for more resources, if you're looking for more training, Citi runs an international young leader program, and I'll be around for like the next 3 days. If you want to learn more, we train and kind of mentor and create this network of community and care around those who are advocating in this space. So we'll close out our panel with this. We have a couple minutes for any Q&A from audience, either in person or online, if anyone has anything burning. Otherwise, we might end and encourage you to come find us after the panel. Do I see any hands for questions? I'm just gonna keep yapping until my time's up. I'm kicked off the stage. It's been a really cool panel. I think we've learned a lot from these lovely panelists. There's been really cool perspectives. I have a question, we'll go to you.
So when you talk about youth and policy and helping to draft policy, what does that look like? Does again, mentorship is it part of that conversation? How would that practically look?
Okay, that's a very, very good question. We have been trying to address this question, and what it practically looks like, what I can tell you from my own experience, how we all get involved, like me, Aishu, Steve, we have been on a table that was pretty small of decision making with the UN Department of Global Communication, where we were actually shaping the agenda of the civil society conference, the climate summit. We wrote the whole thing that's called I was the co-chair when we called it the Youth Climate Conference. That's an actual policy document on the climate change that's there. But lots need to be done and on an independent way. I mentioned yesterday in my opening speech that taking a step forward, we have talked a lot about engaging youth in the policy making and years of conversation. The conversation started in 1985, first time of having youth in policy and youth engagement in the year 85. We look 40 years from here. Um, so, uh, so we are going to have, as I said, 5 policy paper that will be developed by the youth, and those will not be just the 5 policy paper. We are going to act upon it. We have an own ecosystem of our own within the organization, but then we are definitely going to work with the UN, civil society, and member states to at least acknowledge those policy papers being developed by young people. This is our first step towards actually having independent policy being made and acknowledged by the institution.
Awesome. I'll quickly also lift up, I think there's 2 frameworks. One, are we creating novel policy to offer to governments? Are we critiquing existing policy that governments are putting forth, pushing, or looking to resolve? For both of those, we require a research stream so young people can get involved to understand what the policy is, how it affects their communities, and research those impacts. Right? From there, we then have working groups that are open where young people are actively drafting and writing. The policy shifts. Right? Certain language has certain legal ramifications. And so we have mentors that are either working in law or are in the UN space that can kind of advise and guide the youth in thinking about what language is needed to create certain outcomes. From there, we have consultations with youth communities. So maybe we need to translate this policy in a way that young people can actually understand. Right? And we go into the community and hear their thoughts, bring that back to the working group. Then we have to educate our policymakers and decision makers, and then we have to negotiate and then host bilaterals, shifts, and create that change. And with that, I think we'll close out our panel. Thank you everyone so much for your attention and time, and we'll look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. That was truly inspiring, and it's so great to hear about how youth can become engaged, especially in channels that they might not typically find themselves, especially at the UN. So thank you so much to our panelists and to moderator Steve Chu. Let's give another round of applause. Next, we'll be having a workshop at 11:15. So we have about a 15-minute break. And if you could come and sit down a little bit before so we can make sure that we have everything nice and smooth and running. This workshop will be on building strategic alliances through effective networking and partnerships. So we'll see you again at 11:15. Thank you.